Voloshina nazva. 5 things cheating women say, don't fall for it. Symboli 18-231, Historia. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just happened. You weren't there for me. I've heard these lines 100 times, right after the truth comes out. They sound emotional, even tragic. But they're not confessions, they're scripts. Designed to shift blame, control your reaction, and protect her image. I study the language of betrayal, and these phrases aren't random. They're defense mechanisms, refined through repetition, meant to minimize guilt while maximizing your confusion. They work because they sound like vulnerability when they're actually strategy. They appeal to your need to believe she's still a good person. But once you understand the psychology behind each line, you'll stop hearing apologies and start recognizing manipulation. If you value truth over comfortable lies, hit that like and hype buttons immediately. Subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to know where my strongest, most aware men are tuning in tonight. Let's break down what they really mean. Line 1. It didn't mean anything. This is the most common phrase after infidelity is exposed. On the surface, it sounds like reassurance. Don't worry, it wasn't serious. But it's not comfort, it's minimization. An attempt to shrink the emotional and moral weight of betrayal until it seems harmless. The psychology is cognitive dissonance. She sees herself as a good person, loyal, caring. Cheating doesn't fit that identity. To relieve the tension, she separates the act from its meaning. If she can convince herself, and you, that it meant nothing, then she can keep believing she's still good. Watch her behavior, she avoids details. Vague language, topic changes, quick transitions. Specifics give the act substance, and substance makes it harder to dismiss. So she keeps it blurry, anesthetized, abstract. But the truth is simple. She knows it meant something. Every decision, every message, every moment carried intention. She felt desire, excitement, connection, and chose to follow it. Admitting that would require full accountability, so she reframes it as meaningless. The danger comes when you accept that version. When you agree it meant nothing, you're agreeing to minimize your own pain. You're erasing your reality to preserve her comfort. She knows it mattered. She just needs you to believe it didn't. Because if you believe that, forgiveness becomes obligation. And accountability disappears. And when minimization stops working, the next line begins. The one that flips the blame entirely. Line 2. You pushed me away. This phrase represents a complete transfer of blame. Suddenly, the infidelity isn't about her choice. It's about your failure. You worked too much. You weren't emotionally available. You stopped being affectionate. You gained weight. You became boring. Whatever specific accusation she levels, the underlying message is identical. I cheated because you made me. You created the conditions that made infidelity inevitable. If you had been a better partner, this never would have happened. The betrayal becomes reframed as a natural consequence of your inadequacy. The psychology behind this phrase is rationalization. Rationalization is a defense mechanism where the mind creates logical-sounding explanations for behavior that's actually driven by other motives. It allows someone to maintain a positive self-image while engaging in negative behavior. Instead of admitting that she chose to betray you because she wanted to, because she was attracted to someone else, because she prioritized her desires over your relationship, she creates a causal narrative where your behavior forced her hand. In this narrative, she's not an active agent making choices. She's a passive responder to circumstances you created. Watch how this argument is constructed. She'll use partial truth to justify complete betrayal. Maybe you were working long hours. Maybe you were emotionally distant during a stressful period. Maybe you did become less attentive to the relationship. These things might be legitimately true, but the leap from, we were having relationship difficulties, to, therefore I had to seek intimacy elsewhere, is not logical. It's manipulative. Plenty of people experience relationship stress without choosing infidelity. The existence of problems in your relationship doesn't make betrayal inevitable or excusable. It might explain why she was vulnerable to temptation, but it doesn't explain why she acted on that temptation repeatedly without addressing the underlying issues with you first. The mechanism at work here is turning infidelity into reaction rather than decision. If she can position her behavior as reactive, as something that happened to her, rather than something she chose, then moral responsibility becomes diffuse. She wasn't really choosing to betray you, she was responding to emotional pain that you caused. In this framing, both of you are responsible. You for creating the conditions, her for responding to them. The betrayal becomes almost understandable, perhaps even justified. After all, what did you expect would happen when you pushed her away? What choice did you leave her? But here's what she's not telling you when she uses this phrase. She had choices at every stage. When she felt disconnected from you, she could have initiated a conversation about it. She could have suggested couples therapy. She could have clearly communicated her needs and given you the opportunity to meet them. When she felt attracted to someone else, she could have created distance from that person. She could have recognized the temptation and protected your relationship by establishing boundaries. When she considered acting on that attraction, she could have stopped. She could have thought about the consequences. She could have chosen you. At every decision point along the way, she had options. She consistently chose the ones that led to betrayal. She's not explaining why it happened. She's explaining why it's your fault. There's a crucial difference. An explanation acknowledges her agency and responsibility while providing context. Blame transfer denies her agency and relocates responsibility entirely onto you. When you accept this framing, you become responsible for healing from a betrayal you're simultaneously being told you caused. You're expected to forgive her for something she's claiming was your fault to begin with. The logical impossibility of this position serves her purposes perfectly. It keeps you confused, guilty, and focused on your own inadequacies rather than on her choices. The danger here is obvious. If you accept that your behavior caused her infidelity, you're accepting that you deserve to be betrayed. You're accepting that betrayal is an appropriate response to relationship difficulties. You're teaching her that when things get hard, she can step outside the relationship and then hold you accountable for her decision to do so. You're also ignoring a fundamental truth. If the relationship was so unbearable that infidelity became necessary, she had other options. She could have ended the relationship. She could have been honest about her unhappiness. Instead, she chose deception. She chose to maintain the relationship with you while simultaneously engaging with someone else. That choice reveals something about her character, not yours. But the next phrase hides something even more manipulative. It's emotional camouflage at its finest. Line 3. We were just friends. This phrase almost always precedes full disclosure. You've noticed something. Maybe you saw messages. Maybe you heard about them spending time together. Maybe you felt the shift in her attention and energy. When confronted, she doesn't admit the truth. Instead, she insists on innocence. They're just friends. You're being paranoid. You're reading too much into normal friendship behavior. She might even get defensive, accusing you of being controlling or jealous for questioning the relationship. This defensive stance serves a specific purpose. It buys her time. The psychology behind this phrase is denial in disguise. She's not outright lying about the existence of the relationship. She's lying about its nature. By acknowledging the connection but mischaracterizing it, she can continue the affair while normalizing it in your mind. Every time you see them together or hear about them communicating, you're supposed to remember her explanation, just friends. This repeated framing is designed to make you doubt your own instincts. You feel something is wrong, but she's given you a rational explanation that makes your concerns seem unreasonable. So you suppress your intuition. You tell yourself you're being irrational. You try to trust her despite the discomfort you feel. Watch how she behaves when she insists they're just friends. She over-explains platonic boundaries. She provides elaborate justifications for why their friendship is innocent. She might emphasize that other people are always around, that nothing inappropriate has happened, that you're welcome to meet this friend any time. The excess of explanation is itself suspicious. Genuine friendships don't require defensive justifications, but guilty affairs disguised as friendships do. She needs to convince you, and possibly herself, that the boundaries are clear and maintained, even as she knows they've already been violated or are about to be. This is emotional staging. She's creating a framework that allows suspicious behavior to continue without consequence. Late-night messages become normal because they're just friends. Time spent together becomes acceptable because they're just friends. Emotional intimacy that should be reserved for your relationship gets redirected elsewhere, but it's excusable because they're just friends. She's slowly acclimating you to accept behaviors that should trigger alarm. By the time the full truth emerges, you've already normalized so much of it that the final revelation feels less shocking than it should. The groundwork has been laid for you to believe that while yes, things eventually became physical or emotional, it started innocently. Just friendship that somehow evolved beyond anyone's control. But here's what's actually happening. When she says they're just friends, she's maintaining plausible deniability for as long as possible. She knows the relationship has crossed or is actively crossing boundaries. She knows that what she's sharing with this person, whether it's emotional intimacy, physical attraction, or actual physical involvement, violates your relationship. But as long as she can keep you believing in the friendship narrative, she can have both. She can maintain your trust and commitment while exploring this other connection. She can delay the consequences of her choices by controlling your perception of those choices. The insistence on friendship also reveals something about her decision-making process. She's testing the waters. She's seeing how far she can go before you notice, before you object, before there are real consequences. Each time you accept her explanation, each time you suppress your concerns because you don't want to seem jealous or controlling, you're giving her permission to go further. The boundaries keep shifting incrementally because you keep accepting each small violation. By the time you have undeniable evidence that this was never just friendship, she's already far deeper into the affair than you realized. And when that evidence finally surfaces, when the defense collapses under the weight of proof, another line always follows, one that plays directly on your empathy and desire to understand. Line 4, I was in a bad place. This phrase reframes the entire betrayal as a symptom rather than a choice. She wasn't acting from desire or selfishness. She was suffering. She was struggling with depression, stress, loneliness, trauma, or some other form of psychological distress. The infidelity becomes positioned as a consequence of that suffering, an unfortunate side effect of her mental state rather than a deliberate moral choice. This framing is designed to generate compassion instead of anger. It transforms her from perpetrator into victim, and once she's the victim, your role shifts from betrayed partner to potential source of additional harm if you react with justified hurt or anger. The psychology behind this phrase is self-victimization. By emphasizing her suffering, she recasts the narrative so that the most important emotional experience becomes hers, not yours. Yes, you were betrayed, but she was hurting. Yes, your trust was violated, but she was in a dark place. Yes, you're experiencing pain now, but can't you see that she was experiencing pain then? The spotlight moves from your legitimate betrayal to her psychological state, and in that shift, accountability gets diffused. People in bad places make mistakes. People who are suffering deserve understanding. People who are struggling need support, not judgment. Watch what happens when she deploys this explanation. She references specific stressors or conditions that make her seem sympathetic. Maybe she was dealing with postpartum depression. Maybe she was grieving a loss. Maybe work was overwhelming. Maybe she felt invisible or undervalued in multiple areas of her life. These stressors might be completely real. The suffering might be genuine. But the connection between suffering and infidelity is not automatic. It's constructed specifically to lower her moral accountability. She's asking you to believe that her psychological state made betrayal not exactly acceptable, but at least understandable. That given what she was going through, anyone might have made similar choices. The mechanism at work is emotional appeal. She's not presenting a logical argument. She's recruiting sympathy. She needs you to feel compassion for her suffering more strongly than you feel anger about your betrayal. If she can generate enough empathy, your natural response to being hurt gets suppressed. You feel guilty for adding to her pain by being upset. You feel obligated to be understanding because she's already suffering so much. Your anger becomes another burden she has to carry, another thing she's expected to manage despite her fragile state. So you swallow your pain to avoid hurting her further. You comfort her while your own wound goes unaddressed. But here's what she's not acknowledging when she says she was in a bad place. Being in a bad place doesn't erase your capacity for choice. Suffering doesn't suspend moral agency. Even in the darkest psychological states, people still make decisions. They still have the ability to choose between options. Some people in bad places reach out for help. Some people in bad places communicate their struggles to their partners. Some people in bad places make mistakes, but stop themselves before those mistakes become betrayals. She had all these options available to her. She chose differently. She chose to cope with her suffering by seeking intimacy outside your relationship instead of addressing her needs within it or getting professional help to deal with whatever she was experiencing. She's not confessing. She's recruiting sympathy. There's a profound difference. A confession centers your experience, acknowledges the harm done to you, and accepts responsibility without excuse. Sympathy recruitment centers her experience, emphasizes factors that diminish her responsibility, and positions you as potentially cruel if you don't respond with immediate forgiveness and support. When you accept this framing, you end up taking care of her emotional needs in the aftermath of her betraying you. You become her emotional support system while processing your own trauma. Your pain becomes secondary to hers, and she never has to fully face what she's done, because the focus remains on what she was going through rather than what she chose to do. The danger of this phrase is that it sounds so reasonable. Of course, people make poor decisions when they're struggling. Of course, psychological distress affects behavior. Of course, context matters. But accepting this explanation requires you to ignore a basic truth. Many people experience terrible psychological states without choosing to betray their partners. The bad place might explain why she was vulnerable, why she was seeking comfort, why she was more susceptible to attention from others. But it doesn't explain why betrayal became her chosen solution. It doesn't explain why she didn't choose any of the other available coping mechanisms. And it doesn't change the fact that her choices, whatever their psychological origins, have devastated you. But the final phrase is the most dangerous of all, because it sounds like closure, but it's actually control. Line 5. I hope you can forgive me. It sounds humble, remorseful, like she's putting her fate in your hands. But this phrase isn't a question, it's a framework. It turns forgiveness into a moral test for you. If you forgive, you're compassionate. If you don't, you're cold, bitter, the reason healing can't begin. The psychology here is image restoration. She's not seeking accountability, she's seeking redemption in your eyes. By appearing remorseful, she regains moral ground. Tears, self-blame, dramatic guilt, it all signals suffering, inviting you to comfort her instead of processing your own pain. Suddenly, you're the one soothing the person who hurt you. The mechanism is emotional reset. Quick forgiveness fast-tracks her relief. Once you forgive, she expects the subject to disappear. No more questions, no more guilt. But forgiveness granted too soon doesn't heal. It suppresses. It forces you to bury feelings that will only resurface later as resentment or distance. True accountability would mean space, her sitting with your anger, your grief, your silence. It would mean accepting that forgiveness might come slowly, or not at all. But when she says, "I hope you can forgive me," what she really means is, "I need you to, so I can stop feeling guilty." It sounds like closure. It's actually control. And forgiveness given too fast isn't healing, it's erasure.